Welcome to the last lecture in the series for the time being. And today we're going to talk about the most beautiful towns in Sicily. Now, of course, this is purely subjective. It's my choice of beautiful towns. There are dozens and dozens around Sicily. And obviously we're not going to get time to talk about all of them throughout the course of the next 40 minutes. So what I've tried to do is just pick a selection, but also I picked those that I think have some sort of historical interest or some other interest rather than just a pretty chocolate box type of towns. So the lecture is going to be a little bit different from the previous ones. There's not going to be so much historical input or that kind of thing. It really is very much an idea of just showing you some photographs and giving you a little bit of background and so on and so forth. So a little bit more show and tell today. Okay, well, the town on this first slide is a small town called Castelbuono, just about 10 kilometers away from Enna, in the very center of the island. The photograph is looking towards the north. These mountains here are the Madonie Mountains. This is Pizzo Carbonara, this one with the snow on it. And this is typical of a town, a small hill town in Sicily. Typical sort of size, typical kind of aspect as well. And towns in Sicily tend to be or have been built on hilltops. Now, what's the reason for that? There is a very good reason for it. Back in the 15th, 16th, 17th century, Sicily suffered a lot from incursions by the Barbary pirates who would arrive by ship on the shore in the evening, and then over the course of the night they would carry off everything that they could with them and make their escape. So quite understandably, Sicilians preferred to live away from the shore. So it's very different from modern day Sicily. Now people love to have their villa or the house by the sea. 300 or 400 years ago, nobody did. The sea was almost deserted in Sicily, and people lived on hilltop towns such as the one of Castelbuono here. Now, there is a corollary to this, of course, because if you lived in a town like this, of course, you felt secure, you felt protected, you were with your neighbours, but quite probably the land that you were farming, and almost invariably you would have been farming, unless you were doing something like being a baker or a tailor or something like that, your land would have been at least a couple of hours donkey ride outside the city. So you would have had to have got up before the crack of dawn, ride out to your land, tend to your land, and then ride back again. It was an exhausting existence living in these hill towns. And it was exactly this that contributed to their depopulation and also to the mass emigration from Sicily at the beginning of the 20th century. It was simply a hard life. People had had enough of it. In more recent years in the 20th century, people have still tended to move away from these hilltop towns, mainly because there's no work there anymore. Most of the work in the past would have been agricultural, but nowadays that's of course become more mechanized, and people are moving to the cities, to Palermo, Catania, Messina, and so forth. And also, as I said earlier, they're preferring to live near to the sea. So the result of this is that these hilltop towns they're certainly not getting any bigger, and many of them are becoming depopulated. So they have a particular characteristic to them. They're almost like lost towns, if you like. One other final thing I'd like to say before I move away from this slide, the name of this town, Calascibetta. There are many, many towns in Sicily that begin with Cala, Calat, or Calta. Calascibetta is a good example, but Caltagirone, Caltanissetta, and so on and so forth. I mean, there's literally dozens of them. You ask yourself, why so many names beginning with this prefix? Well, it simply means in Arabic, castle. It was a castle. And so that tells us very much the origin of many of these towns. Back in the 9th, 10th century, it would quite probably have just been an Arab castle, or even more probably just simply a watchtower, and the town grew up subsequently around it, probably in Norman times. Okay, we'll move on to this map. There is an association, this is throughout Italy, not just in Sicily, an association which is known as I Borghi più belli d'Italia, the most beautiful towns in Italy. And to belong to this association, the town simply makes a request. They make a covenant that they will keep the town clean and orderly. They'll sweep the streets and get rid of the rubbish. And in return, they get some kind of marketing from the association. And then once a year, there is a competition to judge the most beautiful of the towns in each of the regions. It's a very good guide to the most beautiful towns in Italy. And these are the ones that we have in Sicily. But it's not exhaustive. This is what I wanted to say. It is an association. So just because a town or a village is not a member of the association, it doesn't mean to say it's not worth going to see. It means that it probably hasn't just got round to applying for membership yet. And vice versa, there are several towns that are members of this association, which really are, they've been on the tourist trail for many, many years. I'm thinking in particular in Sicily of places like Erice, Cefalù, and Castelbuono. We've known about these places for a long, long time. But nevertheless, it does give us a good guide of some interesting places off the beaten track that are worth the one's time to go and explore. So what I'm going to do today is select some of these towns, and we're going to go and visit, talk about them, show you some photographs, but I've also included some towns that are not on the list, just to show you that it's not exhaustive in any way. And we're going to start in the northeast of the island, up in the province of Messina. And the first town or village that I would like to tell you about is the village of Savoca. Again, Savoca in recent years, certainly in the last 5 years, has actually become quite a popular destination because it is a very easy day trip from Taormina. And nowadays there is actually a hop-on, hop-off bus that runs from Taormina up to Savoca and its sister village, which is just across the valley, a village known as Forza d'Agro. But nevertheless, both of them are delightful villages to go and visit. Just before I show you some photographs of them though, let's stay on the map. Just let's orient ourselves and remind ourselves where we are. So here, as I say, is Taormina. This is Mount Etna here. And this is Capo Peloro, the very northeastern tip of Sicily. Between Capo Peloro and Etna is a small range of mountains which are known as the Peloritani Mountains. They're very beautiful mountains. And they have a number of lovely villages in them. They're quite difficult to navigate because one of the curiosities about them is that there is no road from one side to another. So that means that you have to travel up the valley, back down again, along, up the valley and back down again. So it's quite exhausting to explore this area. But nevertheless, I think that's one of the interests of the Pelotitani Mountains. So let's go and have a look at Savoca. Here in the first slide, for example, you can see the sign for the village with also the symbol for I Borghi più belli d'Italia. And this is the first building that you come to when you arrive in Savoca. It's a bar. Now, to look at it like this, you might think, oh dear, why have we come all this way just to see this tumble down building? Well, this photograph was taken 10 years ago, and I deliberately included it 10 years ago because it's not like this now, unfortunately. If you were to arrive at this bar on a summer's afternoon, like for example now in August, I can guarantee you would struggle to find a seat there. So what's the allure of the village of Savoca? Well, it was the place where Francis Ford Coppola decided to film the scenes set in Sicily in his movie, The Godfather. Now, those of you who are familiar with the book, and I'm sure many of you are, The Godfather, you'll know that the book is actually set in Corleone, which is over on the west of the island near to Palermo. And of course, the book is set in the 1950s. But when Francis Ford Coppola came to make the film at the beginning of the 70s, Corleone was already too developed as a town for him to be able to shoot the movie there. And he decided to shoot the scenes here in this village, Savoca. And this bar became very much the kind of the center of where all the actors and the film crews and so on used to hang out in between scenes. And in fact, there is one scene that actually features this bar. And for years, this bar was run by a lovely old lady. I remember meeting her once. And she had this face that looked like a walnut from so many years of being in the sun, you know, it was shriveled away. But she worked in this bar until about 15 years ago. She ran the bar, and she kept in the bar, there was one room just given over to photographs and memorabilia from the shooting of the film, and it's still there. There's this room there with all the, you know, you've got the autographs of Al Pacino and so on and so forth. The lovely thing is that the bar has not changed. Although this photograph was taken 10 years ago, and there weren't many people there, the actual bar itself has not changed at all. All that's changed is that now a lot more people visit the village. So there were actually very few scenes set in the village, but of course the famous one was this one here, the wedding scene, the scene of the wedding processing out of this, the church San Nicola. And this, where the photograph is taken, is exactly where the camera was in the movie, and they came down this road here. But the other thing that this photograph shows you is that the lovely thing about Savoca actually is that the roads are very, very narrow. You can't drive down them. There's no traffic there. So once you get past the crowds around the bar, you're on your own wandering around the village. And it is a delightful little village to wander around and to explore. And as I say, can all be done in a day trip from Taormina. The other thing about Savoca is that it's also tried to move beyond this association with the Godfather, and it set itself up as an art city. So there are various installations of modern art around the village as you walk around. Not always terribly successful, but it's another reason possibly to go and visit. All right, I'm going to move on now because we've got quite a few villages that I want to take you to all together. And the next one that I want to take you to, again, is still in the Peloritani Mountains. And it's a tiny village by the name of Rometta. And this slide here shows you the village of Rometta here. I've got another slide in a moment which zooms in on it, but for the time being, I just want to show you the aspect of the Peloritani Mountains. And it is a terrific view, which is why I think it's really worth coming up here to visit. So this is looking down over the northeast coast of Sicily. We've got the Aeolian Islands here, Alicudi, Filicudi, Vulcano. This is Lipari, Salina behind. This is Capo Milazzo here. This is Tindari, Capo Calava, and the Nebrodi Mountains are over here. And in the midst of all of this, we have this. This is the village of Rometta. And if I'll go to the next slide because it's a bit more of a zoomed in picture of it, just here. There we go. Now, many people, including locals actually, they think that the name Rometta means Little Rome. And in a sense it could, but it doesn't. It actually comes from a Greek word, Byzantine word, ta erimata, and that means a fortress. And that very much belies its origins. If you look carefully, you can see absolutely vertical walls. I mean, it was absolutely impossible to get into this village. And therein lies its interest, because you might remember in an earlier lecture we talked about the Arabs arriving in Sicily in 827. Rometta was the last town or village conquered by the Arabs in Sicily, and it didn't fall to the Arabs until 965, which is over 130 years after they arrived in the west of the island. And it was also one of the very first towns that the Normans conquered. You remember from a few weeks ago, we talked about how they arrived in Messina. Messina is only just behind where this photograph was taken from. So it was one of the first towns that the Normans arrived in. So as a result, this is what the townspeople are very proud of, is that it is the least Arabicized village, if that's a proper word, in the whole of Sicily. And it's a very charming village. There's not terribly much there to go and see. There are some ruins. This is the gateway into the town. There is also the ruin of a castle where Frederick II went hunting. But there is also this building. And frustratingly, this building is never open. I've never been inside it, but it is an interesting building, I think, because this is a 9th century Byzantine church. And it's just about the earliest church that I know of in Sicily. I mean, it's a typical Byzantine church, isn't it? This square plan and this cupola on the top. But as I say, I've seen photographs of the inside and I think it is just empty, but you can't go in. But nevertheless, a curious village and well worth going out of the way to go and visit, if nothing else, for the wonderful scenery. All right, we'll move on for now, but we'll stay again in the Peloritani region. And I want to take you to a little village by the name of Novara di Sicilia. And the lovely thing about this is the road on which it is. I mentioned that there's no roads north to south here. This is the first road that you come to moving westward across the island that actually bisects the Peloditani Mountains. And it is a spectacular road. It's a beautiful road. It's very difficult to drive. It's just full of curves. And this journey, I mean, this is scarcely believable, but from this coast to this coast takes something like 3 hours of driving, just because you never get out of second gear and you rarely go above 20 miles an hour. But it's a beautiful road. And once you get to the top of it, you come to this beautiful little village by the name of Novara di Sicilia. And I think this always reminds me of a northern Italian town, this particular one. And I think there is a connection there because the name gives it away, Novara di Sicilia, to distinguish it from Novara up in the north of Italy. And the origins of this village in Sicily is, it was a Lombard village, colony of Lombards who came down from Lombardia in Norman times and set up this village. And they would probably have kept the same name, Novara, and just called it Novara di Sicilia. But a very pretty village. Not terribly much to see, but the other reason to visit these villages is that invariably there is a wonderful trattoria. And this is absolutely true of Novara di Sicilia. There is just behind where this photograph, just somewhere down here, a fabulous little trattoria. And that's partly why it takes so long to drive from one side of the island to the other, because invariably you stop off for a meal and have a long lunch. They are quite usually the best places to eat in Sicily are in these little mountain villages where some nonna has been slaving away in the kitchen probably for the last 50 years, where the recipes have certainly not changed, but you can be absolutely guaranteed to eat the absolutely most traditional Sicilian food. So, and that's certainly the case in Novara di Sicilia. Okay, we're going to move away from the east of the island now, and I want to take you to the west of the island and show you a couple of villages there. And the first one I want to take you to is a little town by the name of Palazzo Adriano. And again, this village is in the middle of nowhere, and the road to get to it, you really wonder whether you'll ever get to anywhere, but it's beautiful. You're just driving through some stunning scenery on the way to get there. And when you get there, you arrive at this. All it is a large piazza. This is pretty much the whole village. And you might well ask yourself, well, what's so special about this village? Well, I think it's very, very special. And so too did somebody else. For those of you who have seen Cinema Paradiso, the film, you will understand what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen it, you really must go away and see it. It's a beautiful film about a young boy growing up in Sicily. It's a kind of autobiographical film made by the film director Giuseppe Tornatore. When he came to film his film, he travelled all around Sicily trying to find the quintessential square, Sicilian village square. And this is the place that he hit upon. And Palazzo Adriano is the setting for Cinema Paradiso. In fact, they did a little sort of cinematographic cheating because they actually built, if you can remember the film at all, they actually built a cinema of wood over in this corner, because of course the village itself doesn't have a cinema at all of its own. So the one thing that there is to see and do in, this is another shot of Palazzo Adriano, is down in this corner here, is visit the museum of the making of the film Cinema Paradiso. And it's just got some nice photos of stills of the film and also the music by Ennio Morricone. You probably heard that he died, unfortunately, the other day, and there were lots of, the radio was playing a lot of his pieces. I think I heard the theme tune from Cinema Paradiso about 5 times in a week, 2 weeks ago. But the lovely thing about it is that when he made the film, many of the inhabitants of the village were cast as extras, and they all tell stories about when they were a star in the film, and of course they were just sort of sitting at the back of the cinema and so forth. But nevertheless, it was a big moment in their lives. There is actually one other reason to visit Palazzo Adriano, and that is this church here. It's not what it seems, actually. It's quite difficult to get into, and I've only ever been into it once. It's very often, it's closed. It's not what you would expect. It belongs to the Eastern Rite. It's not quite an Eastern Orthodox church. It's an Arbresh church. It belongs to the Albanian church because the population of Palazzo Adriano was originally Albanian. And I should explain that. I mean, it sounds a very curious thing, but in fact, around southern Italy, by which I mean Calabria, Basilicata, Puglia, and Campania, as well as Sicily, there are, all in all, about 50 or 60 Albanian origin villages. Now, these were villages that were set up back in the 1500s. These were from Albanians who were fleeing the onslaught of the Turks in Albania. And they came and settled in southern Italy. And they have more or less maintained their traditions until today, which is extraordinary. And in some of the villages, they still speak Arbresh, which is not actually Albanian. A few years ago, you probably remember, Italy had the problem of refugees coming over from Albania. And the Italian government had the idea that they would settle these refugees in these Albanian villages. And it was a total disaster because the Albanian, or the Arbresh, that these people speak is the Albanian of 500 years ago, which is completely not understandable to modern Albanians. So that's the other reason to visit this village here. But there is one other village in the west of Sicily where they do still speak Albanian, and they still very much hold their Albanian traditions to the fore, and that is the town of Piana degli Albanesi. It's not a beautiful town, it's not a pretty town, Piana degli Albanesi. And if you go there sort of in the middle of the year, you'll think, well, you know, why should I come here? But there is a reason to visit here. It is famous in Sicily for producing the best cannoli. You know what I mean by cannoli, those desserts. They look like a brandy slap filled with ricotta and sugar. And it also has the world record for making the world's largest cannolo. But that's about the main thing that it's famous for, except for on Easter Sunday, when they have this fabulous procession through the village, and all the townspeople dress up in these costumes. This here is at the end of the procession where they stand on a podium and they get given out prizes and so forth for the best costume. But the costumes are utterly beautiful, and absolutely fabulous. So this is Easter Sunday a couple of years ago, and you can see that what the girls are wearing here, really vibrant colours, and this gold is real gold filigree. I mean, these dresses cost an absolute fortune. They mortgage their houses to pay for these dresses, and these belts here are solid silver, usually with a buckle depicting St. George, who is the patron saint of the town. And beautiful, beautiful damask colours here, the blues, the reds, and the greens as well, and black. And the costumes of the men, almost Greek, isn't it, with the skirt, the long socks, and this really lovely sort of cowpack goatskin hat that they wear. But really a lot of fun, and a beautiful ceremony if you do happen to be in Sicily on Easter Sunday, to go and witness this. Staying in the west of Sicily now, this is not really a small town, but I wanted to take you here to a little place called Grotta Mangipane, because it's really a curious place, and I actually only discovered it, well, I knew about it, but I only went there for the first time 3 or 4 months ago. And it really is an extraordinary place. It is a cave. Here we go. So the cave is here, and the village is actually inside the cave. So here we are. There's only about 5 or 6 houses inside it, but these houses, the village itself, is actually built inside the cave. Now, these houses, once upon a time, housed the quarry workers. Nearby, the village of Custonaci is important for quarrying marble. It is where all the marble comes from in Sicily. And in the past, the workers would have lived in this little Borghi here. Nowadays, it's abandoned. They don't live there anymore. They've got houses down the road. But it's been maintained as it would have been once upon a time. And it's really lovely to go and visit. And of course, some of you might recognize this, those of you who have watched Montalbano, because of course it features in several of the Montalbano films, and quite understandably. But nowadays it's a sort of museum of country life once upon a time. So you go and you see the old Sicilian cart, you see the fish drying from the rafters, they have some geese pecking around, and so forth. Lots of fun things like that. So a really nice place to visit, and worthwhile if you are in that part of Sicily. I'll move on now, because time is moving on and I'm getting behind. I want to go to this area in the centre, the north centre of Sicily, which encompasses, you can see in green here, the regional park of the Madonie Mountains. And here there are some lovely little towns. So we've got Isnello, Castelbuono, Sicily, and we've got 2 villages by the name of Petralia. We've got the lower Petralia, Petralia Soprana, and the upper Petralia Soprana. And then we've got 2 other towns just outside the Madonie, Gangi and Sperlinga. And all of these that I've just mentioned are really worth at least a short visit. So I'm going to spend 10 minutes just taking you very quickly to see what we have in each of these villages. First of all, let's go and have a look at Isnello. Beautiful little village, this tucked in behind this fabulous crag, this mountainside here, very, very, very dramatic. Cefalù is only just over this mountain, but you'd never guess that the sort of hordes sunbathing on the beach are there on a summer's day like this. Eagles nest up in these crags. Very often you look up and you see eagles soaring above. There's some fabulous little restaurants again in Isnello, and really a very, very charming town to go and visit. One other photograph here. This one was taken in the spring, and of course in the springtime, beautiful spring flowers dotted around on the hillsides. So that's the village of Isnello. The other one I wanted to take you to was, well, I'm going to take you to Petralia Soprana, the upper Petralia. And this is really a very special village, I think. This photograph I took one winter. This was New Year's Eve, actually, about 5 or 6 years ago. So you see, in Sicily, we do, well, always actually, nearly always, there is snow in this part of Sicily. This village, Petralia Soprana, was the village that Prince Charles went to stay in when he came to Sicily, because he went there to paint his watercolours. You can see it's got a very attractive skyline, this, and it's also very pretty inside to just go and wander around. There's some lovely churches. There's one up here, a couple more further down as well. Very, very pretty village. And as always, it has a very good trattoria. The other one I want to take you to is this village here, Sperlinga, which is, this is what it looks like here. Now, the clue is in the name, because the name of the village, Sperlinga, comes originally from a Greek word, spelia, which means cave. And if you think about it, a speleologist is somebody who studies caves. And that's what this village is. It's this quite extraordinary outcrop of rock. But originally, the village itself was houses that were built into it. They were caves inside it. And in Norman times, they actually built a castle inside the rock. So you can just see up here, these are actually the stables of the castle. And there's various tunnels inside this rock. It's all quite exciting to go and visit. But there's also an interesting historical connection with Sperlinga, because back in the 13th century, Sicily was ruled over, at the end of the 13th century, was ruled over by the Angevins, French. Those of you who've been to Naples, you might have visited the Castelbuono, which was the castle of Charles of Anjou, who ruled over much of southern Italy. And in Sicily, he was hated, to the point where in 1282, the Sicilians rebelled, and they killed, almost to the man, every single French soldier on the island, except in the town of Sperlinga, where the Angevin soldiers were spared. So the people of Sicily, even today, they call the people of Sperlinga the traitors against the Sicilian cause. So it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but nevertheless, it's remembered all the way through Sicily. But look, you can still, as you walk around that rock, you still get to see people's doorways. And some of these are still inhabited. I think only 1 or 2, but they are still inhabited today. And there's another one here. It's almost, I always think this looks like a sort of hobbit's house. I don't think this particular one's inhabited. But 1 or 2 of them, you can actually go inside and visit a cave dwelling from the past. So Sperlinga, a very nice little village to go and visit. And now I want to take you to an extraordinary place. That is the town of Ganji here. And I think anybody who's ever set eyes on Ganji will never forget their first sight of it, as you invariably drive round the corner on the road and there it is, suddenly Ganji is in front of you. This is Ganji here. What an extraordinary looking place. In the middle of all this beautiful countryside, you see this, which looks like a sort of bit of an eyesore, doesn't it really? This great sort of carapace here. And invariably, what's so spectacular about it, especially in the wintertime, in the background, you get a backdrop of Mount Etna, which is it's about 60 miles away at this, where we are here, but nevertheless, still very prominent. So that's Ganji. What an extraordinary place. I've got another view of Ganji here, this one here. But let me tell you a little bit about Ganji, because I think it is an extraordinary place, and it's really worth visiting if you've got time to go and visit it. It begun life, this building here was a castle built back in the Norman times by the Ventimiglia family, and the town spread down the hill over the course of years until these buildings here were built in the 20th century. This building here actually is the prison. But what happened, especially to these buildings here, beginning of the 20th century, just as I was explaining at the beginning of my talk, mass emigration away from the center of Sicily to, in the case of Ganji in particular, to South America. A lot of them went to Brazil, and Argentina was the place that many of them went to. A lot also went to the United States and also Australia. And they simply abandoned their houses. So Ganji had a problem in its hands 20 years ago. It had all these buildings that were just literally falling down. Nobody wanted them. And at the same time, the people who moved away, they'd passed on this property to their grandchildren. The grandchildren had never visited this town of Ganji. They were still paying some sort of tax on the building. They didn't want it. So the town hit upon a good solution. It bought up all these empty properties from these emigres in the United States and Argentina and so forth. And then it put these buildings on the market for the price of €1, with the proviso that if you bought the house, you did it up within 12 calendar months. If you didn't do it up, you forfeited your ownership to it. Now, you've probably heard about this scheme because it has been copied by many other towns around southern Italy. But Ganji was the first town to come up with the idea, and it was extraordinarily successful. In fact, they had so many applications that they had to interview prospective buyers, and you couldn't just turn up and buy a house. It got to the stage where if you wanted to buy a house, you had to explain what you were going to do with it. You couldn't just have it as an investment or a sort of holiday let. You had to maybe run it as a B&B, or possibly open a shop there, or do something with it. You had to prove that it was a worthwhile cause. Otherwise, they actually wouldn't let you buy it. And it has been amazingly successful. I first visited Ganji 20 years ago. I used to work for a company that ran walking tours, we used to walk nearby here. And my job at the time was to go and do the shopping. And I remember I used to park outside the shops in Ganji. And they would tell me, they would say, oh, we hope you haven't locked your van. They'd say, if you lock your van, it means that you don't trust us, and therefore we'll break into it and steal from it, they said. You have, when you park in Ganji, you have to park your car unlocked. That means you trust us, and that means we won't, you're one of us, we won't break into your vehicle. That was the logic of the town 20 years ago. It's changed a little bit now, and now it is spotlessly clean and really, really beautiful to visit. Just a couple of other shots of them. These are the roofs, the newly mended roofs. This is a shot that I took a couple of years ago in the winter time, just at sunset. This is another view looking down over the roofs of Ganji, all beautifully done up and really absolutely in pristine condition nowadays. Just another shot here. This is showing you one of the beautiful spires, this cone of, this is actually Maiolica ceramics, these decorations on the top of this one here. And this is Ganji in the springtime with the poppies and the flowers and the spring flowers. Really, really, I think it's a really special place to visit. All right, we come to the last place that I want to take you to, and that is the town of Castelbuono, which is just north of Ganji on the road to Cefalù. And it looks a little bit like this. And as you can see, it has a castle in it. This was another Ventimiglia castle built in the medieval times. As its name implies, this was the good castle, to contrast it from, I gather they'd previously built another castle up the hill in Sicily, which was so cold that they moved away and came and built this one here. If any of you have watched Cinema Paradiso, you might remember that this building here was actually used also as the school in that film. A really beautiful place to go and visit. I think you might remember a couple of weeks ago, sorry, in the lecture on Baroque Sicily, I showed you a photo of the interior of the chapel in this castle with the Baroque decorations. But whenever we go to visit there, we always bump into these guys. This is what's really great fun about Castelbuono. These are the rubbish collectors, and they ride around on donkeys and collect the rubbish in these big boxes that they strap onto the side of these poor donkeys that they take around the village and then take the rubbish outside. Just a few other photographs, if I may, of the scenes of Castelbuono. So this is the scene over the rooftops, the scene through the archway looking down the main street, another church there looking off towards the Madonia Mountains. And this is just the town square. There are plenty of wonderful reasons to visit Castelbuono, one of which is that this is the only place in Sicily where they make panettone. So you can buy your panettone, you can sit in the town square eating panettone and drinking coffee. There's also a fantastic restaurant here, which every single dish is made with mushrooms from the mountains round about, and it has a fantastic name. Nangalaruni is the name of the restaurant. Tiny, it's only got 4 tables, you have to book, but really worthwhile visiting. And the other curious thing about Castelbuono is that it is the only place in Sicily where they produce manna. Now that's not quite manna from the Bible, but it's manna, which is a product that is made from the sap of the manna ash tree, which is used as a flavouring and also as a pharmaceutical product. And you can taste that when you visit places in the village. But the other reason is also this, because you sit there in the town square and invariably these guys are sitting around as well. these are also these are their little clubs all around the town square. And you can just imagine their poor, long-suffering wives. They've been slaving away making the pasta and tomato sauce since 8 o'clock in the morning. They've finally come to the end of their tether and they've sent their husbands out to go and do something useful for the rest of the morning. And their husbands have come to sit around here in the town square to discuss politics or football. But people often ask me, they say, you know, or they say to me, they say, oh, I'm going to Italy next year. I'm going to go to Tuscany to study Italian. And I say to them, but don't go to Tuscany to study Italian. Come to Sicily. Because I always say that Sicily is the best place to learn Italian. Come to a place like Castelbuono, and I can guarantee that within 5 minutes of sitting in the town square, you'll be striking up a conversation with one of these guys. And within 15 minutes, you'll be almost fluent in Italian. Because you'll have no choice but to engage them in conversation. So, you know, therein another reason to come and visit one of these lovely Sicilian towns. Well, I've gone slightly over my time limit as usual, so let's unmute ourselves. If you've got any questions or comments or whatever, do by all means fire away. Wave or shout or whatever to catch my attention.
You're going to show that picture.
Kate, go on. Have you got a question, Kate? Yes.
No, I was just going to say, wasn't Castelbuono where we went to on the treasure trip?
Yes, you did. You did.
Yes.
Yes. We did go there, so you would remember it. Yes.
Yeah.
David, have you got a question?
Well, it just seems to me you could select the most amazing range of different villages and towns in addition to the ones that you have chosen.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, you're quite right. I was completely spoilt for choice, and my choice was absolutely arbitrary, actually.
Because when you started, I immediately thought of southeastern Sicily and Buscemi.
Yes, which we went to, of course. Yes,
and of course, that reminded me of the three gentlemen of Buscemi that I actually captured in my lens and painted.
Yes, so there you go, David, or the rest of you. This is David's proof that wherever you go in Sicily, in these little towns, there are men sitting on benches talking away.
I have to say they were blissfully unaware of me because if you recall, the place was deserted virtually.
That's right. They were the only three. Yes.
It was
these three gentlemen having an animated conversation, and we were up, and I used my telephoto lens discreetly so they didn't notice.
Well, it made a very nice painting, that one.
Yeah.
But you could do. You see some of these travel companies. Marketing tours of hidden Sicily or hidden this or hidden that. You really could do that, couldn't you?
Absolutely. Yes. That's right. Yeah.
Just going to see the lesser.
Go and see the. Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you. Yes.
I have a question.
Yes, Alison. Yes.
Yeah, it's a food question. One, you mentioned Sicilian food, typical Sicilian food. Would you be able to?
Oops.
Montalbano, is that the thing that his favourite thing? Is that the canna, whatever it is?
Yes, the cannolo. Yeah. It's just a tube of pastry, which is fried and then filled with ricotta cream, sweetened with sugar. And invariably, it's got lots of pistachios or chocolate,
calories
like that on it, and it is full of calories. And quite delicious.
Love it.
Yes.
But what about general Sicilian food? How would you describe that?
Well, that's a good question, Alison, because proper Sicilian food is very simple, and this is in contrast to many other, European foods. Typical Sicilian food will have very few ingredients, maximum of 4 or 5 ingredients. Invariably, it will be something like pasta, and then a variation on tomatoes or aubergines or courgettes. No spices, maybe some herbs, so oregano they will use a lot, and then possibly meat or fish or something like that. And ricotta cheese is used a lot, and also things like lentils and chickpeas.
Ooh, love lentils, yes.
But very, very, very simple. And then the secret to it all, this is the secret, Alison, is gallons of olive oil. And it has to be top quality Sicilian olive oil, not just your Waitrose olive oil, I'm afraid. And I'm always amazed when I mean, unfortunately she doesn't cook very much anymore, my mother-in-law, but we used to deliver 5-litre tins of olive oil to my mother-in-law, and about 3 weeks later she would say, I've run out of olive oil, you need to bring some more. Where this olive oil was going, I have no idea, but really it is used in great abundance, and that's the secret to it, absolutely. So and a lot of time, that's the thing. And when I said that Sicilian, and dare I say this, Sicilian housewives slaving over the stove, they start cooking at 8 o'clock in the morning, and it's a very low heat, and it goes on all morning until lunchtime, and that's the other secret. So slow cooking and watched over very carefully and lovingly done. Nothing is done just a half an hour before. So good question, thank you. Anybody else? Yes, Jenny.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
We were remembering the hotel that we stayed at near Ganji, I think, and I was trying to think. What it was
Yes.
called. And it was.
Did we stay in Villa Reino?
Yes.
Aldo.
Yes.
And the owner, yes, who I always think looks like Basil Fawlty.
Yes. We had the most fantastic array of foods in the evening. It just kept on coming and coming and coming.
Yes.
And it was splendid, absolutely splended. It was
Exactly.
a lovely day.
Thank you. And that's a typical Sicilian dinner. Yes,
Yes.
yes, absolutely. Thank you for reminding us about that.
Damien.
Oh, hello, Donald, yes.
I think the town was called Rometta. You showed us a slide, and as I looked at it, I thought, how could they possibly go out to farm when it seemed to be just
So
completely surrounded by other mountains and no possible
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, what you didn't see perhaps in that photograph, and all of the Peloritani mountains up until 100 years ago were terraced, and they would have gone out and they would have gone to the terraces, and the terraces would have had the vines, they would have the olive trees, the lentils. It would have been very simple farming. Now, the great tragedy of the whole of the Peloritani region is that with the 1920s and the mass exodus to the United States and particularly to Australia, those terraces have no longer been maintained and they're starting to fall down. And what happens when we have the very heavy rains, which we invariably do, we have terrible landslides in that area. So it's very, very sad that, you know, we need people to go back and mend the terraces and do the farming, or at least plant some trees or plant something to hold the land together, because without it, Donald, it's falling down, the whole mountainside. So, but yes, they used to go and farm, and it was a very tough existence, unfortunately.
Thank you.
Yes. Anybody else got a comment or a memory or a question? Or
Damien?
oh, Tina, yes.
I think it was in Rometta, because we went to that Byzantine church and it was, of course, closed.
We did go. Yes, I remember. Yes.
But we also ran into the most wonderful thing. There was this group of people in beautiful Renaissance costumes. And I think it was still in Rometta. We hadn't moved on elsewhere. And they were filming, I think it was like a travelogue, because we asked someone. So I think, would it have still been in the town? It was, I have some pictures, it was very narrow. I'm just, because it all blended together and we were very tired.
You've got a better memory than me, Tina, because I can't remember that. But it must have been there. It must have been there because Rometta is the place that's yes, because, so they venerate very much St. George there. He's the great patron of, you know, Christendom and so on. And that's where they do. They go and make these films of, you know, St. George fighting the dragon and the knights and so on. So you're quite right. I'd completely forgotten about that. If you've got any photos, send them on, Tina, because I haven't.
I do. That's how I remember it. My memory, alas, is not very good. But I'll send them on to you.
Please do. Thank you. Thank you. Yes. All right. Well, any last questions? Otherwise, I think we might have to go and have our dinner.
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yes.
It's Sue here. I haven't been on any of your tours. I went to Sicily over a year ago and did see lots on our group tour, but that was fun. But it's been absolutely fantastic. So I'd like to say thank you for that. But also say, did you not say you're going to do some more Zoom lectures in the November time?
Thank you for reminding me. Yes, absolutely. And this is a good,
I'd hate to miss them.
this is a good note to wrap up on. So if I may, in the next couple of days, I'll just send out an email to all of you. I mean, you must be on the mailing list because otherwise you wouldn't be following this. Just to basically to ask you the kind of thing that you would like us to run the lectures on. The sorts of things I'm thinking about are other places in southern Italy. We could also do lectures on other destinations that we run them to, for example, in Turkey, Armenia,
Greece,
and so forth. And Greece, of course, yes. And
And
the
do you
other
ever
thing that we could
Istanbul?
do is we could also invite guest speakers, and they could be, for example, I know an archaeologist professor who could talk to us about the archaeology of Greece. I know some cooks that could do a cooking demonstration. So there's all those sorts of things we can do. So what I'll do is I'll send out an email asking what your interest would be. And based on that, in November, December, we will, yes, absolutely run some more lectures. And you will be kept in the loop for that, because if you're on the mailing list for this set of lectures, we'll keep you on the mailing list for the others. And I don't want you to cancel your subscription to this mailing list, but bear in mind that it's a separate subscription to our normal one. So if you do find that the mails just get too much, and then just drop yourself off it, and you can always resubscribe if you ever want to later on. Just send us an email and get back onto it. But
Do you ever go to Corsica or Sardinia?
no, we don't. And probably I ought to. People keep nudging me that I ought to start running things in Sardinia, especially. And Corsica, I can see David getting in there. But this is possibly, I don't want to speak too soon, but I don't know that we're going to be able to run many trips, unfortunately, in September and October, but this may well be my opportunity to go and research some new trips. So possibly in the next couple of years, we are going to be able to do that.
Yes, the cultural side of Sardinia might be very interesting, because not many firms do it, I think.
They don't do it. So there is our opportunity. So I might be going off to Sardinia in November or something.
Do you need someone to carry your bag?
Well, I was going to say,
Go for it, Sue.
Steady, steady.
if people are interested in that kind of thing, get in touch because you know, quite often, you know, it's nice just to have. Sometimes, I mean, David will remember we went off to Buscemi. It's nice to have another pair of eyes to look at things with, and to give me an idea because you know, I don't know what everybody's going to enjoy doing. So
You don't go to Santorini, do you?
we don't, but I can see that becoming popular as well. I can see that I'm going to have a lot of research to do this winter.
But Istanbul would be easy for you, Damien.
And Istanbul, yes. Now that we're supposed to be going to Istanbul in November, but I don't know if we're going.
No! But that was a lovely few days.
We shall go back. We shall go back.
I'm going to have to go now, so I'll have to say goodbye.
I think we're all going to have to go. It's past 6 o'clock and both of beer here.
Thank you very, very
much, Damien.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I'm so going to miss my Tuesdays now. What's going to happen on a Tuesday?
Thank you all so much. And see you again
very much.
in November, if not before.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
See you tomorrow, Anne.
Absolutely.